when data protection bill was tabled in Lok Sabha. Let's quickly cut into that important bite that came in from Ashwini Vaishnav, the IT minister, when he was tabling the bill in the parliament, before we jump to it.
Or should we just jump to the do's and don'ts first, right? I think we can try and pull in that that soundbite. In fact,
absolutely,
that excerpt from the Lok Sabha later. But let's understand what is this data protection bill really and what it is all about. So let's start with the key players, right? This is something that we touched upon yesterday around the same time that Minister Ashwini Vaishnav was presenting the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, DPDP 2023 in Parliament, in Lok Sabha specifically. Now, what is this data protection bill all about? It's got three major players, really, Shweta. One, of course, are the data principals. Who are the data principals? These are individuals, digital Nagrik, citizens of the country that leave a digital footprint anywhere that they make a transaction or input any data on any website. So, that's a digital footprint. Everybody who's logged on to the internet, created something as trivial as even an email ID, or let's say has created a WhatsApp account with the phone number, email ID punched in, has left a digital footprint. So these are the data principals. Then there are the data fiduciaries, exactly the same companies. Let's say, an email service provider, or let's say any other telecom service provider, e-commerce platform, even an offline retail shop where you swipe your credit card, or you check into a hotel where you show your PAN card or your driving license and a copy of that is kept, or something as simple as booking an airline for which you may have to even show your Aadhaar card. Now, all of these agencies or companies that collect the data are called the data fiduciaries. And then the third player, a very important player in this case, and let's move on to the third player, is the Data Protection Board. This is a government appointed body, a regulator of sorts that ensures that the data that the data fiduciaries are collecting is protected and is not breached or not shared with a third party. Now, what is this DPDP, Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, all about? Some very, very critical elements to consider here. Number one, there is now going to be a fine of up to 250 crore rupees if data is transferred from one data fiduciary to any other third party user without a formal written consent of the data principal. That means you and I will now have to explicitly say that we are okay with our data being transferred. What part of our data, how much of it, being transferred to which entity, for what purpose. So it's what I have complete control over my data as per this bill now, and without my explicit consent, this data is not going to be shared with any third party except, and there are exceptions, except in the case of, let's say, a medical emergency, except in the case of the government requiring, so national security, and the government requiring this data for any benefit to accrue to you or any investigation that the government may want to run on you. So the government is completely isolated from this data protection. Government has complete access to your data no matter what, and government decides where this data is housed and how this data gets used for any purposes of national security or usage by the government. The data bill does not prohibit this data being exported out of the country, which means if you give your written consent, this data can be shared even internationally. There is no restriction on that unless, again, there is a compromise on national security. So the government will be able to decide that these are a list of countries that we find potentially dangerous, where your data could be misused, and as the government of India, we decide which countries your data cannot be sent to. So that becomes an important part here. Now, this whole 250 crore rupee penalty, now while this penalty can go anywhere between, let's say, 10 crore rupees to 250 crores, 250 being the upper limit, the new data bill actually, prevents jail time. So there is a compounding of penalties, but there is no jail time for data fiduciaries. Good, bad, I don't know. I think that is something which is open for debate.
Which is one of the concerns. There are a lot of concerns.
Absolutely.
And I want to understand, would it be then right to say, Karthik, at this point, that all your pesky calls from telemarketing agencies to your data being shared with, parties that you've never interacted, all of that could be stopped at source with this?
So, Shweta, I think wherever your data is right now, whoever owns your data, as part of the new data protection bill, anybody who owns your data today, as of this day, or once the bill gets passed, honestly not today, will have to explicitly seek your permission to use that data, to use that data for their own purposes, to use that data to transfer to any third party. And as a consumer, as a data principal today, you have the right, not today again, matter of figure of speech, once this bill becomes law, you will have the right to get your data deleted or erased from the servers of whoever owns your data. So yes, pesky calls could finally come to an end if you decide not to share your data, or if you decide what purpose your data gets used for. And pesky calls, I think, should soon become history. But then there are other concerns as well. Other concerns are that the government appoints the Data Protection Board. So
I want to come to your concerns and the concerns that have been raised by other people who've been closely watching out this bill, including the opposition. Let's quickly play up that bite of IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav first.
Honorable Chairman Sir, I rise to move for leave to introduce a bill to provide for the processing of digital personal data in a manner that recognizes both the right of individuals to protect their personal data and the need to process such personal data for lawful purposes and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
All right, so bill has been tabled in Lok Sabha.
it got tabled in the Lok Sabha yesterday.
It will be discussed. There will be a debate, and key concerns that the opposition has and some of the analysts, people who are active in the domain of data protection have, is that this data could be utilized by the government as and when it wants. In fact, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, so as to allay some of these fears, went on record to say, no, we're not using your data. We'll only use it when national security demands. Now, national security is a very vague term, and we know what's happened in the name of national security in the past, which is where the crucial IT Act also comes into the picture. The 69 provision of the IT Act, which is that government can get hold of your data as and when it wants, wherever it deems fit. It's a question of national security. All of that debate is once again brought to fore through this bill, among other concerns, of course.
You're right, Shweta. I think there are concerns with regard to how much data and for what purpose will that data be used by the government. Those are valid concerns. There's no doubt that, it is worthy of debate. But my whole defense on this is that at least there is a bill on the table today. At least there is some movement in your data getting protected, at least against some misuse by some third party. So while there are these concerns, and these concerns of course are going to be raised by opposition, should be raised by advocates of data privacy and should be debated, I think the time has now come for this data bill in some form to become a law.
Okay.
So at least whatever breaches we are seeing today, whatever transfer of data to third parties we are all sort of succumbing to today, needs to be put an end to. And that can happen only if this bill becomes a law in this form or any further amendment. I mean, it's gone through multiple amendments already. It's been in discussion for about 4 years now. It's been 4 years in the making. It is time that in some shape, some form, this bill does become a law, and there is at least some protection of data that gets introduced in the way data is used. Now, parallelly, it also becomes a pain point for big tech. Big tech runs its business on account of the amount of data and the analytics that run on that data, where they are able to profile even through cookies, even through without your direct consent, even by understanding what sites you have browsed and what items you have looked at. There are suggestions across multiple other platforms for you to buy the same goods. So I think there has been enough misuse of data, enough power vested in the hands of few big tech companies that sit on top of this data as kings and queens and are able to use this data in any form they deem fit.
Okay.
So at least, restricting some power of the big tech, preventing misuse of data, data breaches, data leakage, and all of this not going into the wrong hands or into hands of people you don't want, right or wrong hands you don't want your data shared with. So at some level, I think all of this should come to an end with this bill becoming law. This particular bill or any further amendment to this bill, if data protection becomes a law, and the Supreme Court has also said in its 2017 verdict that right to privacy is now a fundamental right. And despite that, 6 years on, we don't know where our data is. We don't know who accesses our data and what our data gets used for. As a result, there are frauds, there are pesky calls, there are unwanted emails, there is spamming, and God knows who's sitting in which part of the world has what data that you have access, you have provided to somebody else in some other context.
Right. So, of course, data protection bill there. The fine prints, as you heard, we explained, this bill, we don't know whether it's going to be discussed today, but it has been tabled in Parliament.
It has to be debated. It has been tabled. It has to be debated, whether that happens today, tomorrow. But it should be debated in this session itself, and hopefully both the houses should pass this and it should become a law.
All right, will become a law perhaps by the end of monsoon session of the Parliament. We'll bring you more details.